So this is our last remote program for the series that we've offered this year, and we have two presenters. Nancy Huntington, who works in the visitor center. She's worked there for 8 years as a interpreter, and prior to that, she had a bunch of different other jobs as an interpreter. She has a background in history, but she has a real interest in natural resource management and wildlife management. And she has been working with Ginny, and I'm gonna hopefully say your name right, Ginny, Dautriel. Ginny, she works for the Natural Resources section of the Division of Water Supply Protection, and her focus is on prescribed fire habitat restorations, rare plant monitoring, and stream macroinvertebrate sampling. She got her undergraduate degree in wildlife science from Virginia Tech, after which she did a number of seasonal wildlife and fishery positions. After landing a full-time position as a field biologist with the Texas National Guard, she became involved in their fire ecology program. Merging interests in aquatic ecology and fire ecology, she earned her graduate degree at Texas State, examining the effects of wildfire on aquatic systems. After this, she worked for DCR as the supervisor of the state forest out on Martha's Vineyard before coming west to Quabbin Reservoir. And Ginny lives with her husband and son, as well as a dog, 2 rabbits, 2 lovebirds, 2 cockatiels, 6 chickens, and 3 ducks on a little over 1.5 acres in South Hadley, Massachusetts. So welcome, Ginny and Nancy, and please begin.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and start screen sharing. Okay. All right. That's visible, Maria? Great. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Today I'm going to be talking about the use of prescribed fire at Quabbin and Ware River watersheds. And just to preface, burning at Quabbin is not new. It was done prior to this current program up through the early 2000s. And of course, prior to European colonization, fire was a tool that indigenous people used for land management. So just going over what is prescribed fire. Prescribed fire is the application of fire with specific objectives or goals. These goals can determine where, when, and how a fire is implemented and the weather parameters. In order to safely apply a fire, all personnel undergoes nationally standardized training. We implement our fires under DCR fire control and with agreements with local fire departments, Mass Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, among other partners. So this is an illustration on how a fire can be implemented. There are fire breaks around the perimeter of the burn unit, and the burn unit is the area where the fire is applied. Examples of a few different types of breaks. The hard break across the top is a paved road. The hand line across the bottom is scratched down to mineral soil. And sometimes the tree line can function as a fire break at certain times of year when the moisture in the wooded area is high enough that it won't carry fire. We often use mode breaks on our fires. And here's an example of a mode break. You can see that nice line. The fire is just tamped out with a fire tool or a very small amount of water. So a major part of the planning of a fire is developing a burn plan. And this is based on the National Wildfire Coordinating Group Plan format, which is a nationally recognized format. As you can see, it's very comprehensive, everything from the description of the area to objectives to how the fire will be implemented and monitored, both during and after the event. Another part of the burn plan process is the technical review. And this is a formal process in which a third party reviews, comments, and signs off on the burn plan. So just going over a few of the sections. This is from the burn plan for the fields on the Prescott Peninsula. We first go out and assess the fuels and then categorize them into standardized fuel models. We then take those fuel models and the weather parameters and run them through fire behavior modeling software, which gives us the expected fire behavior the day of the burn. We also do the adjacent fuels, and this can also dictate the weather parameters in your burn plan. So another element of the burn plan is smoke management. We want to be careful where our smoke goes and not to cause any negative impacts. In order to implement a burn, we obtain an air quality permit from the Department of Environmental Protection, which restricts the air quality conditions under which we can burn. We also map out potential sensitive receptors, such as long-term living facilities, schools, etc. And then we use smoke modeling software. We input the fuel loading and weather conditions to see where our smoke's going to go. And then if needed, we'll adjust our weather parameters based on this. So then the day of the burn, there's roving smoke monitor, and sometimes the fire towers also have personnel watching our smoke and making sure that it's doing what we predict. If not, that can shut down a burn operation. So as many of you are aware, our current management activities for forested vegetation communities include timber harvest and deer management. For our open habitats, it's predominantly mowing and brush hogging. And as noted in our land management plan, we're looking to use fire as an additional management tool to increase diversity across the landscape at both the vegetation community and species level. So one objective for the use of fire is to locate sites that support oak and oak hickory, as well as oak pitch pine woodlands. Over time, fire exclusion has led to the increases in shade tolerant and fire intolerant species, which can cause a formerly dry site to become more mesic and in turn limit oak regeneration. So we want to reintroduce fire to these areas to support oak. Another use of fire would be our restoration sites. This includes fire-dependent barrens habitat, which includes heathlands, inland grasslands, oak and oak pitch pine woodlands. A number of these sites were identified and noted in our land management plan in conjunction with the Massachusetts Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program. These habitats are globally rare, and within these sites, there are a number of state-listed species. An example of a rare plant would be purple milkweed, and in other areas of the country, this has been shown to rebound exponentially after a fire. So just highlighting one of the restoration areas, we have Barre Heath, which is in the Ware River watershed, and it was identified as a degraded heath habitat back in 2005. In 2008, there were some mechanical alterations were conducted on a very small portion of the heath. Later in 2017, a timber harvest released the understory. And with that, some of the generalist species, such as the white pine noted in the 2018 photo, were also released. In the winter of 2019, these units were masticated in preparation of a fire. And this also helped suppress some of the non-heath associated species and assisted with the restoration of the heathland. However, without regular disturbance, those generalist species can reestablish. So in 2021, we were able to implement a prescribed fire on half of the heath, and the fire effects were right on target. We really reduced a lot of those generalist species. We reduced some of the leaf litter while promoting warm season grasses and ericaceous shrubs that define a heath. And weather depending, we will be implementing another prescribed fire on the unburned portion of the heath this year. So within those restoration areas, after a few entry fires over time, we'll switch to a maintenance regime, which generally occurs with longer intervals. We've also started using fire on the fields on the Prescott Peninsula, burning 3 fields this past fall. And again, fire was previously used as a tool in these fields, as you can see in these photos from the mid-2000s. And some of the benefits of using fire over mowing are that the fire will reduce that thatch to allow for better seed to ground contact, which in turn can increase the diversity of herbaceous plants, including warm season grasses, while decreasing encroaching wooding vegetation and also decreasing some of the invasives. So we are also looking to reestablish fire in other areas, such as the woodlands around Quabbin Tower and potentially areas like Soapstone Hill. An additional benefit from using fire is the promotion of resilient vegetation. Fire-adapted plants are native, deep-rooted species that thrive after a fire. These plants are often drought-tolerant and recover quickly with disturbance. And then for us at Water Supply, these deep roots also assist with water filtration and soil stabilization. And of course, being a large watershed, we are concerned with wildfire risk. With longer growing seasons, more extreme fluctuations in precipitation, more vegetation can grow with those longer growing seasons and during years of higher precipitation. And then in turn, that vegetation then cures during those periods of low precipitation or drought, which translates into increased fuel loads and increased wildfire risk. And Massachusetts doesn't usually come to mind when you think of wildfires. However, just this last year, there were over 1,100 in the state. And this is just a map of some of the data we've been pulling together. And it displays some of the wildfires that occurred on the watersheds. However, you will notice a huge gaps in the data. We're still pulling this data together. And there's more data in recent years due to the reporting systems. And so one example of a fire in Western Mass is in 2020, there were 56 acres burned in Leverett, which took about a month to control. There were also reports of torching hemlocks that were diseased from woolly adelgid. So one reason prescribed fire is beneficial is to reduce those fuel loads. So by using prescribed fire regularly, the understory volume will be reduced, so the fuel load is also decreased, resulting in less intense fires. Reducing the understory vegetation height, which also called ladder fuels, which can potentially carry fire up into the canopy. And DCR Fire Control has been working a lot out in the state forest on Martha's Vineyard, and you can see the difference between the area treated with fire on the left and the area without on the right. And again, as Maria mentioned, I first got started working with fire down in Texas. And Texas Parks and Wildlife has a very active prescribed fire program and regularly burns their state parks. So you can see here in this photo, both sides of this photo were subject to a 32,000 acre wildfire, but the area on the left was treated with prescribed fire regularly and the area on the right was not. So one other benefit is that prescribed fire offers opportunities in training on wildland fire techniques, such as suppression, ignitions, and experience working with the equipment. Those assisting on prescribed fires are often the ones responding to wildfires, and the experience is invaluable. Anytime there's participation on a prescribed fire, it increases knowledge and safety on future operations. And for our resource management firefighters, it gives us knowledge of application of fire, also familiarity of equipment and tactics, and effects on those resources, as well as a knowledge of fire effects on the resources that we're managing. And then finally, recent studies from South Carolina have found that watersheds that include prescribed fire as part of their management have increased water quality. Prescribed fire can alter the detrital mass and chemistry in ways that improve long-term water quality. It affects the organic matter, which can result in reduced dissolved organic carbon and total nitrogen concentrations in surface waters. And that concludes my portion of the presentation, and I can hand it over to my colleague, Nancy.
Okay, thank you, Ginny. And everyone just give me a second to hopefully, okay. Hopefully everyone is seeing a screen that says prescribed burn Prescott. Is that? Okay, all right. Actually, in order for me to view this, I can't see anyone in the chat or anything, so I'm just going to assume that this is working. Okay, so I had the opportunity to go on the one of the Prescott burns that Ginny mentioned, that was done last year. It was on November 10th, 2022, as per this front slide. And she had been telling me about the burns. She had been, I had been working with her for the last couple of years on, habitat management and, different things, different projects. And so she had been teaching me about the whole burn reasons and benefits and all of that good stuff. But I had never actually seen it or experienced it. And so I got a chance to go out on this Prescott burn, and I was absolutely blown away. It was such an awesome experience. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of see what I saw on a day of the burn. Like, so this is, I'm going to just take you through the steps that they did and how it went. And hopefully that'll give you a better sense of what exactly is involved in the process. So this is the target field for the burn that you're looking at. And the goal was to reduce things like white pine, goldenrod, and other common species, as well as invasives such as Japanese knotweed. Fire will reduce the thatch to clear space for planting native warm season grasses like little blue stem and allow for more light to penetrate and for seeds in the soil to germinate. These are the photos from the field across the road from the previous that had actually been burned just a few weeks prior on October 28th. And you can see the charred patches on the ground and up the base of some of the vegetation. That white pine in the lower left-hand corner doesn't look like it was significantly affected because you can still see some green at the top. But even the low intensity fire that went through will actually kill that off from the landscape, which is what one of the goals was. The last picture shows a close-up of the ground where you can still see young new growth. This shows that a successful burn doesn't mean to burn everything till it's black. It's when we're talking about a burn, we're not talking about making everything on the ground, look like black and charcoal. In some instances that may be the goal, but in this case it wasn't. And so you can see all the little shoots that are still, that are coming right up just a couple of weeks later. Any prescribed burn, as Ginny was explaining, is a major operation that requires uncompromising coordination between multiple agencies. DCR Fire Control, DCR Water Supply Protection, and 4 local town fire department crews all worked together on this particular burn. And as Ginny said, the local crews are not just on hand as extra bodies. Their presence is vital to their departments because it gives them that real world training in seeing how fire moves through vegetation, how wind temperature and humidity affect the fire, so that they are better prepared in the event of a wildfire if they have to respond to it. And even though there are multiple agencies involved, there is a very strict chain of command. So this is 2 slides that shows you. One is the map of the target area with the sections clearly marked. They are marked both on this map and out in the actual field itself. This not only helps with planning the burn flow, but it is critical for communication. If one area needs to be specifically addressed for any reason, everyone knows exactly where that is. And every burn also has a posted organizational chart so that no matter how many people from however many agencies there are, everyone knows the chain of command and who is handling what. For this burn, the burn boss was Dave Salino, the DCR fire chief. And I'm going to try to see if I can move my cursor over so I can point some things out to you. Hopefully you can see the cursor. So the burn boss is up here in the corner. This section here says AREP, means the area representative. That's the person who answers questions and keeps the fire clear for non-fire personnel. SOFR stands for the safety officer. Person, if someone gets injured or if something happens, they are the ones who coordinate the assistance to that. FEMO is the fire effects and monitoring observer, which includes monitoring the weather conditions every 30 minutes. And this varies with conditions, weather patterns, and vegetations. It could be a little more, could be a little less. They check the temperature, the wind speed and direction, relative humidity, and other weather factors that are critical to the success of the burn. There is the smoke observer, and that is exactly what they do. Their whole job is to observe the smoke. This doesn't have one listed, but we did actually have someone on that day as the smoke observer. And it's exactly what you would think. They just watch to see where the smoke is going. If it gets too thick, then there can be public safety concerns in the surrounding communities. Logistics, that's just coordinating the day of the fire, the paperwork, which fields to burn, bringing maps and handouts, providing notifications, such as to DEP and Quabbin personnel. And the chart on the bottom is the IA group, which is a ignitions group, which rotate around the burn as necessary. The holding divisions are the ones who make sure that the fire stays in the unit. So they're the ones who are going around and tamping out the fire afterwards and making sure that it doesn't move on from where it's supposed to be. And then lastly, the ignition group, which is the folks that actually run the drip torches and set the spot fires. So this is where it started. You can see this is the prepped edge all around the designated burn area. This is the fire break that Ginny mentioned in one of her first slides. And usually, in this case, it was a mown section that both marks the perimeter, sort of a do not burn past this line. And also, if it were a larger prescribed burn, is used to section the area off to smaller contained sections. So the map that I showed you on the last slide, where it had different letter marks, you can see this letter mark A, which shows you this is that A section from the map, so everyone knows where they are. And this is the crew getting ready for the test burn. So they don't just start off with just burning everything. They start in a small test section, which allows them to make sure that the fire is going to move as they're expecting. They have all those parameters that they checked beforehand, but they want to just make sure up to the very end that it's going to run the way they expect. So they do a test burn area. And if anything goes wrong in that test burn area, the whole thing is shut down. So if for any reason, like the wind is picking up or the humidity changes or something happens that's going to adversely affect the burn plan, then it gets shut down. So that's why they start with the test burn. And this is setting the burn. You can see it just starts in that small corner, and there's lots of folks around waiting to make sure that that goes the way it's supposed to. So now that they've accomplished the test burn and things are moving correctly, they're letting it go. And it's moving from the test burn into the ignitions operations. And this is just a couple of minutes later. This is that same spot within minutes. That burn is already out. And the lower right-hand slide, you can see crew members in the back who are walking around to make sure that all of those initial burn areas are out. And this was just within a matter of minutes of that initial test burn being set. So this is some pictures of the burn in progress. And I want you to notice how low the flames are. This was a low intensity burn, which is why much of the vegetation is still standing. However, the non-fire resistant species will be affected by this, and enough of the thatch has been charred and consumed so that when the seeds of the desirable grasses are planted, they won't have much competition and they will be able to take. And the top left corner, you can see the drip torches that are used to basically spot burn. This is just one of the ways that the size, direction, and intensity of the fire is controlled. And in the bottom right, you see a crew member ready to follow up with hand tools to manually stamp out any embers. It's kind of like when you're kicking out a campfire. You tamp it out, you step on it. And so that's what they're doing. Just there's a whole bunch of folks going around doing that and tamping out those little spot fires, making sure that everything is safe. And of course, there's a water truck there, and that not only keeps the edges of the fire wet, which is called a wet line, so that the fire doesn't spread out of bounds beyond the mapped area. And that also is going to douse any flames once they've achieved their goals. So that truck is able to drive around because of that mown area, because of that brake line, and so they can get to any place that they need to. And this is just some more images of that water truck being used and the crew making sure that everything is tamped out. And this whole thing, this took like 20 minutes. So this is a prescribed burn in a small area like this is not something that's going to be going all day. This was a very quick, in this lower left-hand picture, you can see how successful it was, how much of that field from the very first image is already charred and cleaned in just a short amount of time. So more images of, you can see in the upper right-hand corner, the crews are using the water to tackle any smoldering parts that need help dying down, as well as they're continuing to walk the area and address any concerns on the spot. This is what they call making it cold. That's the expression that they use. Now, for this particular burn, massive downpours were predicted for the next day, which would also eliminate any lingering concerns. In some burn cases that are not going to be followed up with a substantial rainfall, the crews will go out and check the site for any possible spots of concern for up to 4 days. So once the fire is out, it is still continued to be monitored for several days afterwards. And that first burn went really well and was over quickly. So there was another area on the burn plan that they were able to get done that day. And so this was just moving down to a second smaller field. And again, you can see the fire break along the perimeter shows that they had already been planning on doing this. And the crews are working, they're setting the test burn right there. Now at this point of the day, the sun is getting a little bit lower. So the next couple of pictures is going to have some sunlight in them. Again, this fire went really quickly. This field was mostly goldenrod. And since it was the fall, it was very dry. So this burn also went quite quickly. And I just thought this was such a cool picture. That is the burn boss, Dave Salino. And I had to include this picture because I just thought it looked really great. He's there, he's the man in charge, and he's surveying the successful burn with the sun. I liked it. And this is the end of that burn. They're going around. They did have the water truck on standby, but they also have this utility vehicle that goes around in areas. This was a little bit bumpier. So they went around with that just to check for any areas that might be lingering. And can you tell which side was burned? I think this is a great picture to show that under the right conditions, fire can be controlled to almost a perfect line. This is called the black line. First, the fire break is made, and then there's a black line, which is the charred edge inside of which all the rest of the fire is set. The black line and the fire break determine the extent of the perimeter of the fire and are critical to safety. The fire is never allowed to spread beyond those 2 points. And at the end, there is the after action meeting. It's the wrap up to go over everything. And the burn boss checks in with literally every single person who was there that day to get any feedback whatsoever. He even asked me, and I was just there as an observer. He even asked me for my impressions and my opinions and my concerns. So it's I was just so impressed with how organized it was. I mean, it was military precision through the whole thing. And then even up to the very end, up until the wrap up, they were just constantly checking in, making sure people were able to share any thoughts or concerns or feedback on how well it went. So to me, it was just overall a very positive experience. It really, opened my eyes to see how just how coordinated and how well done these burns are. And I was glad to get the opportunity to observe it and to share that with everyone who's going to watch this video. And I don't have an end slide that says thank you, so I'm going to just stop sharing.
So currently there's no questions in the Q&A. I actually did have a question for Ginny though. You were talking about, when you're talking about, I think the heathland, the Barre Heath, and you use the term masticated. Can you explain how you mean that?
It's I mean, it's very similar to mowing. It generally is of, like larger material. So like you might be cutting small trees, like really small trees, and kind of cutting them up into pieces.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like almost like a heavy duty mowing.
Okay.
Yeah, if that helps.
Yep. All right. Oh, there's a question. Hold on one second. This person has asked, are there any Indigenous folks in Mass that already know fire practices and can remember a public access fire on their property? So I'm not sure whose property we're talking about when you say their property, but what about the first question? Would you know of anything?
I don't. I know the Wampanoag tribe burns out in Mashpee quite a bit. But outside of that, I'm really not sure. And then personal property versus public land. Yeah, as far as right now, I really don't know about personal property and burning. I know there are, like, for instance, there's some agricultural exemptions that I think, I'm not sure if they're still current, but some areas, being in South Hadley, I've seen people in Hadley burning their ag fields. But they have to go through a permitting process as well.
So, I mean, when you talk about member of the public accessing fire on their property, I mean, most towns have a burn permit in the winter months. So usually it is, I think, the beginning of April, right? I don't know in this part of the country if people think about prescribed burns on their property in the same way. I imagine in the Southwest, people must do that on a regular basis.
Yeah, in the Southeast, it's very common. Yeah.
And then it sounded like the Wampanoag have a prescribed fire that they've been doing for a while. So other than that, okay. So can you see your question, Jenny? She said, can you do it the same way to reduce fuel and to stimulate native species?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, fire is definitely a tool that will reduce the fuels and stimulate native plants, and especially increase that diversity of plants. And then the frequency of an area to get prescribed fire is really dependent on the system, so, and how it reacts. So it's a very adaptive science or management tool. So, like, for instance, the fields, we generally would be looking at burning them every 2 to 4 years, depending how they react and how fire, what the responses from the fire. For those heathlands, initially we're going to be looking probably at a 3 to 5 year interval, and then the longer, we'll probably have to do that for quite a while. And then when we switch over to a maintenance regime, we could be looking at more 5 to 8 years of an interval. And again, it's all watching the landscape and seeing how it's reacting to fire. A lot of those woodlands, they can be anywhere from 8 to 10 upwards to 15, 20-year intervals. And that helps out.
Yeah, I am curious if, like I said, every town, they have the burn permit program. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's something that if you went to your town fire department and what are the parameters for your burn permit if you could do it in a small way on your own property?
Yeah, I mean, that would definitely be a better question, one for your local fire chief, and then even for DCR fire control. I mean, I'm kind of more resource oriented as far as my knowledge goes. I should say natural resources.
Something I just want to point out, I don't remember if Jeannie mentioned it or not, I just want to reinforce that the habitat that this helps to restore, the native plants and grasses, as well as the oaks. It's an interesting thing that I also just recently learned that I am always anxious to share, that fire adapted places like heaths and sand plains, they actually support almost half of our terrestrial based endangered species. So they are really critical habitat. I just want people to know that we're not just doing this for, certain, so that it looks pretty or so that it looks a certain way. There's very important wildlife and endangered species that we're trying to protect for. And oaks support, they're a host species for something like 600 different insects and invertebrates and songbirds. If you think of everything that goes into an oak, the number's around 600. So that's another key reason for why these are such important habitats to restore.
So I think that's also a point maybe that is good to mention, which is there's certain habitats in Massachusetts that would help me out here, that are adapted to fire, and then there's the habitats that are not. Correct? Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. So depending on what your personal property is like, it may not be the best way to stimulate native plants, I guess.
Oh yeah, but there are different native plants for different habitats. So, if you want native plants,
I don't, what I'm saying is that prescribed burn might not be the way that you would do it on your property.
Yeah, right. I guess. Ginny.
It all depends, yeah.
All right, well, if there's no other questions, thanks Ginny and Nancy for taking the time to do the presentation, and we'll be recording it, and we are recording it, and it'll end up on the DCR website by the end of this week. So, and it's a beautiful day out there, so now that you're done listening to us, go outside and enjoy the outside.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.